but the amounts involved are what are staggering. We're talking about 6.3 billion shillings, and DCI says almost 82% of this maize meal that was supposed to have been distributed to people cannot be traced, in the sense that when they do an audit, the people involved cannot prove that they brought the unga to the people.
Well, thank you very much, Fred, once again for having me. I think it is the duty of the Committee of Parliament and the other institutions of government to always ensure that there's due diligence in terms of oversighting the expenditure of public funds, because these are public taxes that are actually obtained under very difficult circumstances. Kenyans are struggling to even take care of themselves, and for them to pay their taxes, they have a duty. The government and those in charge of government institutions have a duty to ensure that such funds are actually used prudently and be able to serve their purpose. Having said that, on this particular issue on the DCI, is that indeed President Uhuru Kenyatta had a subsidy program which all Kenyans are aware of it. It was very, very suspicious, the timing of when that particular subsidy was coming in, particularly in that the subsidy program was supposed to only last 4 weeks, which is just around the election time.
It was supposed to last for only
specifically that election
period. 4 weeks.
4 weeks. It was supposed to, it was between July 20th and actually August 20th, which then covers the 9th of August election. And when you look at it, somebody would tell you probably it was supposed to be a political move. And millers were assembled. The president publicly and on a live broadcast had the millers at State House. And then when he formally launched the subsidy program in pretext of trying to cushion Kenyans off the tough times. And so indeed there are certain millers that were shortlisted, and because this is a government process, it was not a secret. It was a public process. And the Cereal Millers Association, the organization that actually manages the millers, and also the Grain Millers Association, also those ones are the small scale millers that we have in the country as well, were assembled and were given a deal to supply a certain amount of of maize meal and other products. It wasn't just maize, because we consume, our staple food is not just the maize, we also have the beans and rice. So some of the products that are consumed at that particular time, and there were funds and budgets that were set aside for that particular process. Indeed, there are some who were given a section of that, because you see, the subsidy program doesn't mean the government buys the product. It means the importers. Exactly. So we give you a deal, you bring in 1 million bags, you're going to bring in a bag at 4,000 shillings, but government will give you 1,000 shillings for every 1 bag that you bring in. That means I've given you a cut of 1,000 shillings. So it means it's just a ratio of what was brought in by the farmers. And there are a lot of millers that actually did get in the mails, those who are actually in the business of milling, but you also have others who are brokers within the same association who do not own a single grain, Fred. They own nothing, but they're also shortlisted as well to be
They don't own anything
but they're millers. And we had an issue with the edible oils the last time we were discussing here, that somebody has been given, because it was mentioned in Parliament, and the Public Accounts Committee mentioned the current CS, who's the CS for Public Service, CS Moses Kuria, then as a Minister for Trade, was actually in Parliament facing the committee, and he submitted actually names and companies of the individuals that have actually been shortlisted, for example, to supply to import the edible oils. And you had companies like Puma Holdings, which was listed in Parliament, so it's public knowledge, and they'd been given 6 billion shillings. The lady that is director of Puma Holdings doesn't even know how a sunflower looks like, but she's been handed a 6. She doesn't even know what it takes to actually plant, sunflower or any of these.
And yet she was given
6 billion shillings. To import edible oils worth almost such an amount, it was very questionable, and a familiar face, of course, to Kenyans, because she's not a stranger here, but that is a story for another day. But I'm telling you, so we had the real credible millers that were actually given an opportunity to bring in to import their grains at a subsidized rate. But you also have other individuals who were not millers, but were masquerading as millers, that were equally extended the same licensing to bring in product, and yet it can't be accountable. That is where the question is, because then it means they can't really show where their grain is, but they purport and they're listed to have imported.
So there's no record of them.
There's no record of them importing.
There's no record of them distributing.
Exactly. Fred, you remember the issue we had with the ship that had docked at the port with oil?
Yes.
Worth 3 billion shillings, or I think 3 or 7 billion shillings, and they're saying it has no owner. You remember that story?
Yeah,
because for you to do importation, Fred, before your product leaves your port the source port,
yes.
For example, if it's in China, that ship has to be cleared where it's going to be, where the product is destined. So the port of Mombasa is very much aware that you're expecting a certain ship with this X number of cargo, and the recipient of this particular cargo is this particular person. So it's not very hard to trace whether or not you brought in the cereals or not. So like I've mentioned before, is that indeed we had a challenge with that, because we had genuine millers who are actually in the business of milling and distributing flour and other cereal products, but then we also had characters along the way that were also cleared to import, but didn't quite import anything, but then they were part of the recipients of the subsidy program, because you had to sort of doctor just some documents to indicate that, you know, Ford brought in 100,000 bags, so we are paying you 1,000 shillings per every bag. It means we're going to give you 100 million shillings. I mean, with that in particular program, that's where we are at with this case of 600.
It's very unfortunate, because when you look at, if you can remember that time, I mean, we had gotten to a place where people were desperate.
Very true.
Because the cost of living had skyrocketed.
Exactly.
For the first time, people were buying maize meal. I think it was almost 210.
Yes.
And it was subsidized, or allegedly subsidized, and was supposed to be sold at 90 shillings.
Exactly.
Now, when years later you come and discover that, you know, a lot of the money was misappropriated, no meal was imported, and people really suffered. This is blood money. It's
blood money, and that's why you see that, like what I've just explained, the Grain Millers Association was, however, cleared by the committee, which directed that they be paid 432 million in balance, which is what I'm telling you. There were legitimate millers that were actually able to bring in the ship, and they can prove that indeed these are the consignments that came in, they were cleared at the port, and this is how the distribution was done. But then, along the same time, there were others who were also given the licensing to import, but didn't quite do that. It's very unfortunate, because Kenyans have gone through quite a lot in the last few years. When you look at the cost of unga, 90 shillings would give you a 2 kg bag, but today 210 is almost double the amount. You know, it just means that the cost of living has doubled, because if you're going to buy bread in the morning, then you're talking about wheat. If you're going to buy it to ugali at lunchtime, we're talking about maize meal. These are products that are consumed on a daily basis. Even an increase of just 10% of that, say 9 shillings, has an impact on how you budget your house. Because you could be saying probably you spend 3 packets of unga, 2 kg packets of unga in a week. So maybe in a month your budget is about 12 bags, right? So for 100 shillings, it means your cost is 1,200. If that doubles to 200 shillings, it means you have to now spend 2,400 shillings to 2,500 just buying flour for your homestead. It's quite something, especially at a time like this, when there's a huge challenge with the cash flow and unemployment as well among the youth. And I think it is decent that the institutions that have been given the mandate to go through such cases be brought to book, whether or not they are politically inclined.
Now, you know, the audacity of these individuals to undertake this kind of thing is what shocks me, because they seem to believe in themselves that nothing can happen to them, despite the fact that we have a legal system, we have, I believe, the biggest number of anti-corruption fighting bodies.
Yes.
and yet people have the audacity to undertake this kind of deal. It is because they believe they are untouchables.
There are no consequences, and that goes back to leadership. Remember, this government, when it came in, and even when they were campaigning, they didn't promise to do anything with fighting corruption. And you remember David Ndei being asked about it, he said it is not part of our manifesto. There's nowhere where this government promised. There's nowhere where this government promised that they were going to fight corruption. And you see, last week, Fred, we were here, and we had a newspaper quoting the PS for Education, Belio Kipsang, saying that 11.8 billion, the capitation money for primary schools, has been disbursed by cash. In any country where leaders are held to accountable, that PS would be out of job today. You understand? But because we have a country...
Because how do you distribute 11 point something
public
billion
money? It means
by cash.
When Anne Waiguru was the CS for devolution, and we had the NYS scandal, and they went and got the young Kafura, the lady that was the face of that particular scandal, and she was summoned in Parliament, and the Public Accounts Committee was interrogating her, and she was told to explain, how did you collect the money? She said, we drove into Family Bank. Sorry, one of the banks here in town. We went into the basement. The money was cashed out in large volumes. We packed into the boot and we went to the site in Kibra where they were running I think the NYS program or something. And we were paying them in cash. That's what she said publicly. Parliament is an institution of record, and you can go back and check on that. That only happens when you have a system that is compromised and allows such kind of things to happen. The incident of the Belio Kipsang paying out capitation money in cash ought to be a national scandal today.
And it's died off.
Completely, because I mean, and you know, the president keeps repeating himself, telling us how he's very serious about fighting corruption. Belio Kipsang is actually his homeboy. You understand? And that's why he's free to be able to do that. And that's why I was telling you that it goes back to leadership. It's very unfortunate. We have a lot of institutions that are actually supposed to. This one is, in fact, this one is what you would consider a common crime. It has nothing to do with the ESCC. The police just go, arrest the character, the documents, and they take them to court. Because such public funds have to be accounted for. It means there's a serious error of omission there on the public servant that is in charge of such kind of funding. And so that
this goes on the record of the then, is it the agriculture?
For
CS.
The CS agriculture, because the institution that actually gives licensing for importation is within the Department of Agriculture. So the CS of Agriculture, I think at that particular time was CS Munya, and I don't know the PS, but he was the one in charge of the Ministry of Agriculture. So he has some explanation to make on and as far as the subsidy program is concerned.
And you know, the shocking thing is, and probably this won't end now, you will see the same individuals going around, and I don't know who bewitched us as Kenyans, because these individuals who you can trace something happened under their reign, but they still stand up and we sing songs of praise to them.
Fred, let me tell you, there is no way public money cannot be traced, because you have to cash it. Even if it's stolen and a cooked up contract, you have to be, you know,
how did it leave?
The IFMIS, that's what I'm telling you.
How did it leave? IFMIS, who received the money, who signed, you know.
You know, I liked what Governor Kafogo, former governor of Kiambu, Governor Kafogo, an old friend of my dad, back at the many years we lived at Mombasa, the port of Mombasa. And he said something that government money cannot get lost, because it has to come out through a certain entry-exit point. And there's nobody who has his own currency. The currency is with the central bank. So even if we've stolen 100 million, Fred, you have to turn up at some financial institution and cash out the money.
You have to cash
it. You have to cash it. So government money cannot lose. It's just the will and lack of goodwill of those in power and those in institutions that are supposed to hold these people accountable that are failing Kenyans. Otherwise, this cannot be, that's why I'm calling it a common crime. The DCI does not need to struggle so much to understand who has the 6.3 billion or who received what and what, because the 6.3 billion is not what was lost. Because like I've mentioned, there are millers.
The budget was 6.3
billion. But as you've seen, and even the committee,
Association, and I think the Owners Association.
Exactly. There are those genuine ones that actually did import and they can prove of their consignments that came in. And that's why even you see the Accounts Committee, Public Accounts Committee, is actually indicating that those particular millers, they have, I think it's indicating an outstanding balance of around 432 million or something like that to be paid, because they can confirm that they actually imported the nani and they deserve to be paid the subsidy. But then the other characters who own none of the products that were being licensed to import, and there was no proof of them having done that, are the characters under investigation. So I guess that's where now DCI comes in to separate.
If we stop being very using soft gloves, this money was simply meant for the campaigns.
Very true. when you look at the timing.
Yeah, the timing and the fact that these monies cannot be traced. and after a while, we'll start discovering some of the names that are going to pop up.
Yeah.
And probably these are names allied to different individuals.
We have an institution called the Agricultural Food Authority, I think called AFA, the one that is in charge of currently, and even I think with the sugar, because they dissolve the sugar board and stuff like that. So part of this licensing process, they have a hand in it, because that's how that's the institution that actually is able to shortlist who brings what in terms of food commodities.
Yes.
And of course, that institution was not being run by ghosts. It was run by human beings with PIN numbers and locations where they stay.
Yes.
So it's very easy to trust them, but it depends with how willingly the government goodwill in ensuring that these people are brought into account, because it's not just themselves. There's a bunch of others who've also done with the edible oils project in this particular government and other food commodities. So that is where politics is coming.
But the edible oils individuals are now in government.
They are now in government. So, and you the one that just told me that these people are there's no accountability, because these are characters that were in darkness before 2022, but now they're in bright lights. So they're able to survive. And but we hope that as Kenyans, because it's our duty to ensure that a country that we fund with our own taxes and our own sweat and taxes, that we try and push such institutions and the leaders in charge.
Let me ask just an interesting question.
Yes.
I mean, I have not had the opposition, and mostly so when it comes to the the PS education.
Yeah.
That saga, I've not had the opposition screaming at the top of their voice over it.
It's because the opposition itself is in shambles. Fred, I've said it before.
It's either in shambles or it's got its hand also in the same.
Of course. This particular opposition, you must understand, the Azimio coalition was being supported by that particular government, and there's a very high chance that there are some of the beneficiaries of the kind of mobilization that was being done with the kind of mobilization that was being done at that particular time.
So basically what you're saying, we are not going to hear the opposition speak anything about the Belio Kipsang issue. We'll not hear the opposition speak out anything concerning this particular saga.
Yes.
About the subsidized maize. And it's all because
there are some of them deep into that particular scandal, which then makes the Kenyan voter and the Kenyan citizen to be the loser. They pay the taxes. Yes. It's being paid by public funds.
And you know, the shocking thing is that we will go to the streets and fight for these individuals who are eating what is supposed to be your children's inheritance. So it is absolutely it's absolute insanity.
It's very unfortunate, and now the government of the people of Kenya have only hope. They can hope that the institutions such as the DCI, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, and the Auditor General and other institutions that have a duty to be able to oversee, and Parliament as well. The biggest failure that we have is actually the National Assembly. Fred, when you talk about the opposition, sometimes we think that is the opposition, that the people that lost the election that are actually supposed to hold government into account. But you must understand that the primary role for the 290 members of Parliament and the National Assembly, which includes the Senate, is actually to oversight into account. Because these people, that's what they're paid for by these Kenyans. They're elected to do that particular job. It's not just, so the whole of National Assembly is actually supposed to be an opposition wing, to be able to oversight executive. But then we are here now because of the culture of our politics and an assumption that then is a section of certain people that are supposed to be able to oversight government, and the rest of us, it's our time to eat. And so, like I said before, then it means it leaves Kenyans, the taxpayers, as the losers in this particular conversation.
Well, let's definitely hope that, last week there was a crusade in Kenya, mega crusade by Benny Hinn. Awesome stuff happened, and I thank God that he actually came into the country. It's very unfortunate, again, I've had some, but this we'll discuss during our Christian World Today on Sunday, but we can just touch a little bit of it. The leaders were prayed for, the executive was prayed for, and I pray that, you can pray, but if the person is not willing to do something about it, well, the situation might not change very much, because again, God respects the will of an individual. So, but prayers were made for this country, and I believe things are going to change. Hopefully, we are going to start seeing now, the whip being cracked on some of these individuals, and actually seeing people going to jail. Because it's blood money, and it will not benefit your children, it will not benefit your children's children. It will actually come to haunt you. But it's very unfortunate that we can have this, and it's a kawaida thing.
Fred, you know,
we've actually grown dull. Our senses as Kenyans
on
have
paper,
grown dull on this.
listen, but on paper, that is what we hope as taxpayers, because truly it's our funds that are actually able to run this government. But this government has not shown any single bit of commitment to see to it that leaders are held into account. The first order of business when this government came into play is that the DPP went on an amnesty spree that dropped all cases, some of the major cases that were in parliament, that were in courts on corruption charges, in a very systematic way, and in a way to show that is being arm-twisted to be able to do that. And as soon as he did that, they moved him to another department. They gave him a promotion now. You know, that DPP is now head of NSIS.
Yes.
You understand? So it hasn't shown any commitment. This government hasn't shown any commitment to crack down on corruption. So Kenyans will have to wait for a very long time. That's my honest opinion. Yeah, they'll have to wait for a very, very long time.
Anyway, well, the Lord will deal with some of this. Even we'll also deal with them. Now, one of the other issues that basically helps with the entire this week is President William Ruto and Raila Odinga's trip to Uganda. And there's a beautiful picture of the three gentlemen with sticks. And then those
adding kettles.
They called Ankole.
Yeah, the
Nyankole cows. The ones with very huge horns.
Yeah.
And if I listen to Raila Odinga after that, he seemed uncomfortable that people were now connecting him with the president.
Very true. I think Honorable Odinga found himself in what you would consider a catch-22 situation, because I told you this candidacy, legally it must be proposed and endorsed by the government or where you're coming from.
Yes.
So he has no choice. The government of Kenya, whether they like him or not, to validate his candidature, the government of Kenya has proposed him as its candidate to the African Union. So to some extent, he cannot avoid President William Ruto, because it has to come from that. That's one. Two, it is indeed true that, and I think when we had this discussion here probably 2 weeks ago, I told you that when you look at when you look at the dynamics of the African Union, in as far as this particular position is concerned, Musa Faki comes from the Western region, in a Francophone country as well. So those guys have been there before. They are the ones in this particular position. So they might not be very willing to run another candidate from that, what you would call an ECOWAS region. And right before that, we had former President Zuma's wife, who was the head of the African Union. He comes from the SADC region. No, that's why I'm not shocked yesterday when Honorable Odinga was quoted saying, President Cyril Ramaphosa has already endorsed me for that, because I told you he's been his friend for a very long time. The immediate former chair of the African Union, Madam Mrs. Zuma, had been there, so they do not have specific interest in that particular position. So it's very easy to mobilize those particular regions. I told you, and not just President Ramaphosa. I've told you, Lazarus Chakwera, who used to live here in Buruburu, a Kenyan by all means, speaks Swahili. The president of Malawi is an outright vote for him, as well as Hakainde Hichilema in Zambia. That is almost the key players of the and Mnangagwa as well in Zimbabwe. So he pretty much has it in check, especially by locking in President Cyril Ramaphosa, who then heads the SADC region, and of course President Olusegun Obasanjo from the ECOWAS region. He just needed to sort the East African region, and the only exception that was in the East African region, if you can quote me last time I was here, I said is only President Ruto and President Museveni, because once he has that, he's as good as through. Unless if there's other politics at the African Union, because there is some conversation on eligibility in terms of regions and states, because they're saying that there's a decision being proposed that shall be proposed to the panel, a forthcoming panel in the near future, that actually stops countries that have run for such positions in the last 10 years in any of the two positions, the chairman or the deputy chairman of the AU, and from proposing their candidates. And remember, we had a Kenyan who had been there before. No, Amina was running for the race, But we've actually had a Kenyan who was a vice chair of the African Union in the last 10 years. The gentleman, I keep forgetting his name. So it's
he must have performed funny if we can't remember him.
Yeah, exactly. He was. And this is what makes the candidate of Raila Odinga different. It's the stature.
Yes.
Because you see, Amina Mohamed, for a long time foreign affairs CS, also was she's been very good in she's a real diplomat in many ways, but she could not be able to mobilize that because of the lack of the political stature. President Uhuru Kenyatta had to single-handedly try to push her around. But Raila Odinga does not need William Ruto to push him around. He just needs the legality of being the endorsed candidate for Kenya, and that's where President William Ruto's role pretty much ends. The other presidents.
When I listen to Raila, he seemed to be trying to tell his people, I'll still be around. I'll still be able to do I'll still be Raila.
Fred, I was telling you last week that anytime there is transition, there will always be jittery, especially if it's an individual of a bigger personality of the scale of Raila Odinga in an institution. There are three areas, remember, that's going to be a vacuum. There's going to be a vacuum in the Azimio leadership. There's also going to be a vacuum in the ODM leadership. There's also going to be a vacuum in the Nyanza region, and also in the other regions that have supported ODM, that have looked up to him as the sole candidate for the national cause. All these regions have to keep asking themselves, what next? You understand? So he understands that. But those who are wise and are able to read the mood of the moment is that Raila Odinga is on an exit strategy. If, for whatever reason, Raila Odinga is likely to become the AU chairman, I can guarantee you Fred is out of Kenyan politics, even by age and accomplishments. He doesn't need to say it because he understands the implication of that. There are those who relied on his brand and his brand of politics to survive politically, whether or not they're supporting him. For those who support him, Raila Baba Tosha. The other ones who are not supporting him are always running to defeat Raila Odinga. All these characters are going to have an extremely hard time. Effectively, from January 2025, by God's grace, their political careers will be heading to a different direction. And there's a window there for an emergence of new players, particularly the young ones who are trying to find their space, and the old ones who are trying to stick around. I don't know how long they will last.
So we are likely to see some big names going down.
Yeah, and the debate has been on whether or not Azimio will break up. There will be, effectively, Azimio breaks up in January 2025.
It's going to break.
There will be no Azimio after January.
Now, there's another rather disturbing story that I've seen. I know this is in the courts right now. The talks between a gentleman who claims to be President Mwai Kibaki's son and the family failed. And so the gentleman is seeking to have the body of the former president exhumed for DNA testing. That will never happen in any part of Africa.
Yeah, but you see, they say in life you have to keep pushing the limit. You have to keep pushing it so that then a few people can say, okay, listen, we can't exhume the body of our father. We can cut you some 10, 100 million. You leave us, especially if it appears likely. I've seen the guy, and he partly resembles him in a way. When you look at him, he looks like the former president, the late President Kibaki. And so he has that's why, Fred, the 2010 Constitution gave us a whole chapter on the Bill of Rights. It's very much within his right to go through the legal process at least. He has not tried to kidnap the body of President, President Kibaki. He's going to court, and the court will have to listen to him and what he's proposing. You do not have necessarily to run the DNA test against the father. You can run against the other, the other relatives, so the brothers, the children. There can be a likelihood. If both of us are from the same father, there's a chance that we could have the same DNA results.
But that can be, that will be whatever decision. If he gets his ruling, that is going to be a precedent. We've never seen this anywhere in the world, I guess.
No, I think it is because you are assuming the stature of President Mwai Kibaki. But President Mwai Kibaki is just a citizen and a human being. So we've had very many cases where bodies have had to be exhumed.
But not bodies of ex-presidents.
That's what you're assuming because of stature. But the courts do not recognize stature. Remember, even President William Ruto, these courts can actually end his presidency. And then you know that. It can dissolve an election and it goes home. So the law does not recognize stature, that you are this and this and that, because the Constitution of Kenya, particularly this 2010 Constitution, presumes that all Kenyans are equal and we all have equal rights in the face of the law. So President Kibaki in courts is just a regular Kenyan with a citizen with an ID number, and so any challenge that is made, he is
you and I know. On paper, what you're saying is true. But on the ground, things are very different.
Fred, I'm telling you,
on paper,
we were in this
what you're
country.
Saying is true.
We were in this country
yes.
when a 42 billion shilling election was turned around. It was historic. It was historic.
Yes.
And the courts have countless number of times in Kenya and across the world exhumed bodies that were buried many, many years ago to actually get out the DNA test.
But this is not just the body of any other Tom, Dick and Harry.
That law.
This is the body of a former president. Still in the minds of people, he represents or represented a unity.
Fred, in terms of perception.
So you touch him, you're touching the rest of Kenya.
In terms of perception,
yes.
There's no rest of Kenyans. In terms of perception, President Kibaki, for late President Kibaki,
yes.
he's just a citizen of the Republic of Kenya.
And I agree with
Did you see?
Paper,
did you see?
On
Fred,
paper, he's just.
And I'm telling you, in courts as well.
Yes.
In courts, they do not acknowledge that this is a former president. There is no exception to one Kenyan. There is no Kenyan, Fred, who has a bigger right than the other Kenyan. In the eyes of the law.
George. On paper.
Yes.
On paper. That is what the Constitution says.
Yes.
On paper. That's what the Constitution says.
Yeah.
And the reason why we are discussing him,
yes,
and not some guy in Nyambale whose body was exhumed is because of who he is. And that's he still is former
I completely agree with you, but yes. I'm telling you, you know, Fred, don't forget that I'm a legal practitioner. I'm an expert on legal matters.
True.
I've appeared in courts. And I'm telling you, when you read
what you're saying,
when you go to court, that's why not on paper. The alleged son is actually in court. Mm-hmm. He's not saying it from the streets.
True.
He's in court. In court, Fred, the judges make decisions depending on what is presented to them and vis-a-vis what the Constitution of Kenya says.
And public interest.
And in any case, Fred, the process the process of acquiring a DNA sample is not something that includes, is not a very wide process. Mm-hmm. They can just simply dig up, get samples of him and go up. That's what happened. I've actually been to one. I've been to one where there was a land case, a large a relative was a huge landowner and there was a dispute from his land, and obviously in an African setup there was a bunch of kids that show up, you know, this was our father, and they went to court to a level where now they had to do a sample of his DNA test, and we went back to the grave. We only took less than an hour. They just simply opened up the casket, the doctors took samples of his body, it's shut, and it was a done deal. I understand in terms of the state of the president, yes, and the President Kibaki, and it's actually a monument, you know, a public monument. His graveyard is a public monument.
Yes.
But legally, the guy is in court. And the court, the way the court process works is that it does not acknowledge that this was a former president. You understand? Even though while making such a ruling, you know, a judge has an option to see which is the best way forward of a particular situation. And I'm telling you, they do not necessarily have to take samples from President Kibaki himself. President Kibaki still has kids around, kids that are his biological children. There's a chance that they can also use that as a sample to be able to see if at all they have some traces of identity between the sons and this particular individual. If it is indeed true, it's possible that brothers could have similar DNA tests and also blood, the blood type and things like that. So they can be able to check on that. So the judge, whatever court that this gentleman goes to, even if it goes to the Supreme Court, the judge, in their making of the decision, they have to look at the best way possible on how to do it. You remember CJ Mutunga in 2013 when he was adjudicating the case of COD, and he said, I looked at the options. We had a situation where that had we nullified the elections, we didn't even have a credible institution to actually conduct that election. So it was a balance of probabilities, and it was easier confirming this presidency and then settling the political scores, as opposed to to plunging the country into an unconstitutional situation that could have been worse for the country. So sometimes a judge has to measure that. So it's possible that he will go to court and he is in court.
He is actually in court.
He is in court, and those are some of the options. So the judge has actually a leeway to look which is the best way possible for him to access justice. And that could include taking samples from the brothers.
We'll wait and see. Now, the other thing is counties.
Yes.
I know you're very interested. You deal a lot with the different counties. A report indicates that they've only used 10% on development.
It's very unfortunate.
And it just shows you.
Fred, you can imagine a county like my home county of Kakamega has a budget of 18 billion shillings. And probably 50% of that is what goes into what you call the recurrent expenditure.
Yes.
So my assumption would be around 9 to 10 billion shillings, even if there's a margin of error, say 5 to 10%.
Yes.
So if 60% of that particular budget goes into recurrent cost, that's the wage bill and cost of operations, then it means you have around 8 or so billion shillings that is supposed to be a development budget. When you tell me that our county has only spent 5 billion, less than 5% of that on development, it's tragic. It's tragic because then it negates the whole reason as to why we went in for the devolution and the expectations of Kenyans that were expecting from these particular county governments and what they wanted to, what they were looking forward to. But when you look deeper into why sometimes we have issues of a challenge in the expenditure, is the bureaucracy that comes with the disbursement of funds and execution of projects at the county level, and the hand that the control of budget has in terms of approving projects, that what is supposed to be even an automatic disbursement, sometimes you had to. I've been to the county where we're supposed to process a payment, funds haven't come. You hear that the chief officer is going to Nairobi to see the control of budget so that funds can come next week. Can you imagine? I'm telling you the truth. That's why they were saying that the office of the control of budget is now almost becoming like the office of the auditor general. Yet the job of the control of budget is not to audit the funds, it's actually to disperse the funds as per the constitution and how each function is being as per the functions. You know, counties come up with budgets, and each budgets have limits on the particular function. So you'll find, say, the health function will spend 2 billion shillings, the education function 3 billion shillings, like that. So the control of budget has a layout of that. So when he gets funds, he then disburses them according to ratios, in terms of ratios, percentages, but to the specific function. So you say, okay, the health function, for example, is supposed to receive 2 billion shillings. So the first quarter, we're going to disburse 500 million that goes to the Department of Health. And then the same applies across the other departments. So sometimes when you have a delay in disbursement of funds from the National Treasury, and then the funds come late to the county accounts, and then the approvals come late to the control of budget, and then the control of budget has to again approve the inflow of the funds to the particular functions. Then you find there's a delay of 3 to almost 6 months of executing such functions. So by the time you are now going through the procurement process, which then takes a couple of months, you're already in the last quarter of the year, and yet you're supposed to have spend this money. It all comes to the inefficiencies that I've always told you that are in the national government. I hope someday we can come up with, and I was proposing this to my brother Sifuna. I was telling him that now I think the Senate must now come to a position where it comes up with a bill where we're able to separate the national treasury and create what you call a county treasury, so that funds that come from the consolidated fund are able then to go straight into the two accounts, so that we are able to separate the national treasury from the county treasury, so that whoever is in charge, the governor, whoever is in charge of the county treasury, probably the Department of Devolution, it then disburses the funds directly and timely to the public, to the counties, so, and then work out the issues of bureaucracies that are there within the issues that are there within the department of the budget, some of the departments in the Ministry of Finance, including the control of budget, so that then you do not have a very lengthy process of approving funds. That alone takes 6 months. If you have 3 months,
just approving funds,
almost 6 months. Because you can imagine, that's half the year, because you have 3 years. If you, for example, if you have a situation where the national government is yet to disperse the funds for December, this is March, so it's 3 months late. Already 3 months late. Then the funds, the controller, and I'm telling you, then those are 3 months gone. Then you have another 3 months of the control of budget, managing which funds go to which particular function within the counties. That's why I'm giving an example, a real example, because I have traded with the Department of Trade and Tourism in our county. You go there and then we don't have funds. We hear now the chief officer has to go to see the control of budget to actually be able to bring the funds. You know what they used to do in the Kenyan football situation? Yes. You hear that Kenya Harambee Stars is playing in Nigeria, but the players do not have or they are not yet booked in the hotel. Then we are shown on TV some Nyamwea carrying money manually is going to board a plane that is going to book a hotel for the, you know, those kind of things.
Yes.
So you can imagine those are 3 months of this delay in disbursement from the treasury, another 3 months of politicking with the control of budget, and then now the funds are in the county. You have to go through legal procurement process that takes 3 months. So 9 months the department is yet to do anything. They have the programs, but then they do not have them. So you have 3 months to be able to procure everything in that short time. It's impossible.
And this gives rise to corruption. Because
very true.
If you have 3 months within which you are supposed to spend, say, 5 billion.
Yeah,
and you don't want the money to go back.
Yeah, and then you have a procurement process that is regulated by IFMIS.
Yes.
You can't just walk in, then take the money and you have to go through procurement. Then the expenditures have to be audited before funds are approved and payments are made. Mm-hmm. You know, that takes another, it can't take 3 months. So then it brings in the issue of pending bills, high interest rates from money that has been borrowed. There's a challenging gap. And it's because, and that's why I keep saying this, the president that will truly transform this country, Fred, will be the president who will appreciate what devolution was supposed to be, cut down on bureaucracy, cut down on useless institutions that are still hanging around the national government, so that the CS for health must be in tandem with the 47 CECs of health.
Yes.
Must have regular engagement, which should be monthly or quarterly. Funding must go quarterly, so that programs are actually executed quarterly. That person will truly transform this country. But as it stands, and this president, you know, he said that he was very committed about devolution. And he was talking about big government, cutting down big government. That's why he was kept saying that there's mere people, they want this prime minister's job and all these things, yet we have devolution. 2022 has gone by. 2023 has gone by. We have the idea this is 2024. If it gets to December and nothing fruitful is seen, then you can, this term is as good as dead, because next year people are back to campaigns. Any serious presidential candidate has to sink in at least 2 years, and that is 25 and 26. So the president has a very small window, and in particular this financial year, to try and execute some of the things that he needs to do. And some of them really, in terms of a restructured institution, does not need funds. Because Kenyans legally already said we want these functions down there. So you'll simply be executing the mandate of the people of Kenya, like what the Britons did with the Brexit. You know, when they voted that we must exit the European Union, Boris Johnson came in and he said, Brexit means Brexit. We are exiting the European Union. So this president must make a firm decision that Kenyans decided that the health function must be implemented at the county level. It is indeed, we have serious issues of physical infrastructure at the county level. Personnel, human, that's what I was going to. We have serious issues of the human infrastructure at the county level, and also funding of the health programs, drugs and equipment at that particular level. They need funds, but they're struggling because we still have all these amorphous institutions that are hanging around the Ministry of Health, and the same applies to the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Water. We are still creating these development agencies, Rift Valley Development Agency, Wasonyiro Development Agency. Yet we have counties that are already developing those counties. You understand? So those are the challenges that we have, and it's an issue of bureaucracy. We might blame it solely on corruption, but when you look at the inefficiencies that we have, as I've explained, in terms of the process of how the funds flow, clearly there's a lot that needs to be changed.
Is there a possibility that these inefficiencies, this bureaucracy, have been purposely put in place to short-circuit the processes of development? Because if you look at what is happening, the amount of time it takes to get something done. I know part of it is put in place to stop corruption. But it's actually now the mother of corruption.
Exactly, and that's what I'm explaining to you. Immediately after the 2010 Constitution, Fred, the late President Kibaki set up an institution called the Transitional Authority. It had 2 years to ensure it midwives the transition from the old format of governance to the new format of governance with devolution in place. And their first job was supposed to set up the institutions and the teams that were supposed to run county governments. At that particular time, President Kibaki, or even if we give it to him and say we give it we allow him to let that pass and say the president that came in 2013, President Uhuru Kenyatta, was supposed then to ensure that his first job was that I'm going to set up the 47 county governments as $1 billion shillings for each, 47 billion, so that within 3 years we have county government structures and the offices and all that, so that you cut down on the issue of bureaucracy. The functions that had been devolved, all these institutions that exist hanging around all these ministries, they actually formed a committee that was led by Mugo Kibati that was supposed to oversight institutions that are no longer relevant. And that committee, Mugo Kibati, gave a report. And I remember it was cutting down from about 290 institutions to about 180 something. So there were about 100 institutions that were no longer relevant. That report is on the president's desk. It's still at status. Even President William Ruto is just to open up and say, okay, the Ministry of Water, all these Tana River Waters development agencies, we cut down and let those funds go to the departments of water in the 47 counties so that we can build the water infrastructure. Because water, Fred, is a fully devolved function. So we have no business having these agencies working around. There's the national government saying, for example, we have a mega project in Tana River, or Kilifi County, the Grand High Falls, a big dam that's supposed to transform the agricultural sector in the northeastern region. That's a big project, but it is within that particular county and is a function of that particular county. But because of politics and greed at the national level, then you still have a character coming from the national government purporting to be implementing a county function in that particular function. So it is within the ambience of this particular president, and it is possible for it to implement this within this 1 or 2 years if this president means business. Okay.
I can see Kate, you say you're tuned in from Western Kenya. Then we have the gentleman who says ati huyo Buddha ni wa Obako, hapo sio lazima DNA test. You're basically responding to the case where a gentleman is claiming to be the late President Mwai Kibaki's son. Then we have Lennox who says you're enjoying the conversation. Then we have a gentleman called Munat, you say you're tuned in from Kahawa Sukari. Then amazing conversation, and a gentleman tuned in from Buru Buru. So your thoughts about some, I know you've seen some of these videos. Of preachers who are, cutting down whatever happened during the crusade. There's one gentleman who has complained that he was not given proper acknowledgement. and I really got shocked. As if, really?
Benny Hinn is a megastar in terms of the gospel nation. He's been there for many years, and to some is a mentor because of his ability to create such a global ministry, coming from Israel, and now he's big in the US. He's an Israeli guy, I think. He's a Jew, and so he's been able to be a success story, and so many preachers want to be like him. So it was obviously expected that very many local evangelists would want to take an opportunity to share a platform with him. Our very favorite Pastor Ezekiel was there as well, in a very funny incident of being prayed for, and made a huge donation there, 14 million, to Benny Hinn's cause. And it's understandable why there would be others who would actually feel left out in such a platform, a presidential platform, because President William Ruto was there as well, and his family and his wife and his kids. So it's understandable they did that, but we hope that the prayers mean well, and they're in the good interest of our nation, because indeed our country needs a lot of prayers, and our leaders need extreme prayers, so that they can be able to see what they can be able to see the aspirations of the people of Kenya, and at least so that we can head towards what we consider to be the Vision 2030, that we are way behind. We are way behind the Vision 2030, because Fred, Vision 2030, we are only now 6 years away. So we only have one more president. If this president gets re-elected or a new president comes in, he has one term to hit the Vision 2030 target, which is quite a struggle, especially for a country that we still have 60% of our people unemployed.
All right, with that we got to bring down the curtains on this show. I thank God that Ben Hinn did come to the country, and we thank God for his ministry. It was a great opportunity just seeing the church coming together to organize this kind of thing. We pray for more of this kind of meetings. At the same time, you'll never miss one or two people saying funny things, but like they say, every market has its madman. So we thank God for what God did during this period. Don't forget, later on, Daughters of the Kingdom will be coming in, and then later on in the evening, you need at around 7:30, there is the new program, Divine Explosion, where we are going to see quite an amazing evangelist who's been going around the world ministering, and around the country, by the way, ministering to people and getting healing and that kind of stuff. Basically bringing divine life into the lives of the people, making them meet the Lord Jesus Christ. So that will be coming in tonight from 7:30 p.m. There is an evangelist from Australia who is in Kenya and is doing great missionary work. So don't miss out on that. To have yourself a lovely morning. You were trying to show me something.
Very quickly, congratulations to Faith Odhiambo. She's been elected as the new president of the Law Society of Kenya.
True.
An institution that the Republic of Kenya currently needs, because we have a president that is in contempt of court openly. So we need a very strong LSK. We've had this discussion before.
Yes.
So I just wanted to congratulate her for this particular position.
Let's hope she's going to stand up and be counted. That she can be among the LSK chairs that we remember fondly for the work they did. Do have yourself a lovely morning.